Glad you all are joining us today, and we are thrilled to have so many of you on this call. Our Lunch and Learns have been very successful. Much thanks goes to you, and we are going to continue to provide you what we believe is relevant and important information as we move through this election year. Also, we hope that you are doing well and that you are socially distancing and staying safe and listening to the medical professionals as we continue on through this pandemic. So we hope you're well, that your loved ones are well. Today's webinar is especially relevant because, as you all know, in 2016 and even in 2018, there was a flood of misinformation on the internet, especially social media sites like Facebook. Regina, we've got a question from Mara. Can we turn up the volume of the webinar? You would need to do that on your computer, I believe. That's not something that we can do from this end.
That is correct.
Thank you. But there was so much misinformation and mythologies on the web that we believe it is particularly important for the League of Women Voters to myth bust. We're going to be doing quite a bit of this throughout the rest of the year. And one way we're going to do it is through this terrific PowerPoint presentation that the creators are going to present to you today. And I'm very pleased to welcome Gail Formanak and Shar Griffin. They are with the League of Women Voters of the Villages Tri-County area, and they've created this presentation and are going to show it to you today. For all of you watching and who are with us, please, on the top right side of the box where this webinar is taking place, click where it says speaker view, so you will see the speaker and not everyone on the call, and you'll also be able to get a better view of the PowerPoint itself. So with that, I'm going to welcome Gail and Shar, and we're going to hear the news, separating fact from fiction. Welcome.
Thank you, Patty. I'm delighted to be able to do this today. The interest I've had in information and media literacy has pretty much been throughout my professional career. I was a school librarian, and this is what we do. We try to get students and now the general public more aware of good information sources and bad information sources. And as Patty referenced, there are plenty of bad information sources out there right now. So, and Shar took this program that I'd created and massaged it. She's got a lot of good experience with working with the state league's speaker bureau. And so she massaged this and made it more user-friendly. So I'm going to share my screen. By the way, I want to mention that a handout will be provided. It is going to be part of the voter email that you should be receiving later today. So don't feel you have to try to copy down all of the URLs and other websites that we're going to give you. You will get that handout as part of the voter. So I just want you to be aware of that. And let me get into the PowerPoint here. Okay, I hope everybody can see the PowerPoint. And I am going to.
We can see it, Gail.
Okay, good. Okay, so here we go. You all know about the league. This is a standard speaker bureau slide, so I'm going to skip right through there. And this is what we're going to cover. What's changed, why it's more difficult now to know what good information is, types of misinformation, why falsehoods seem to dominate, and what you can do. So just to go through this, you should know that back then, that's the column on the left, there were fewer television networks, and they all competed for the same general TV audience. They spent a lot less time on the news. I remember growing up as a kid, I lived in the Central Time Zone. That 5:30 news was it. That's the only national news you got all day. Otherwise, you might catch a little on a radio station now and then. But now, of course, we have many cable networks with targeted audiences for news and the 24/7 news cycle. Twitter, other social media sources, all of these are providing information to the general public. Now, back then, print was predominant. Certainly, everybody got a newspaper. It's kind of frightening now to know that a lot of the local newspapers are going away. In fact, since 2004, the US lost nearly 1,800 newspapers. And half of all, that's over 3,000 counties in the US have just one newspaper, and usually it's just a small weekly. And nearly 1,400 communities have no local news coverage. So that's really pretty eye-opening. I'm still one of those believers in reading a newspaper every day. In fact, I read 2 every day. But there are a lot of people who don't and haven't read a newspaper in years or never really got into the habit. And of course, television, cable TV has given us so many of these different stations, satellite stations devoted to 24/7 news coverage. In fact, the Pew Research study in 2018 says 49% of people get their information from TV, 20% from social media, and only 16% from print. So it has shifted a lot. Also back then, the print resources physically separated the fact and opinion pieces. If you wanted to read opinion, you went to the opinion pages, the editorial pages. Now, of course, it's very easy to blur those factual pieces from the opinion. People can't seem to tell the difference. Certainly also corporations were easier to vet, the publishers, like you knew National Enquirer, you could, it was more entertainment. They had the sensational headlines. I always laughed, my mother-in-law could never seem to go through a grocery store checkout line without picking up one of those National Enquirers. And I truly believe she viewed it as entertainment. But I think there are people today that they can't tell the difference between a social media entertainment post and something that they really should believe. And of course, editorial oversight in a lot of those companies helped prevent inaccurate information from spreading. But now, with all of the people that are sharing information, we don't know enough about the individuals who are posting. Technology allows the altering of photos. It used to be that pictures were considered proof positive, but not anymore. And bogus websites, fake accounts on social media, all of those things are prevalent. So here's another table that shows how people are preferring to get their information. You'll see that younger people are certainly getting their information in a different way from boomers. They're shunning the traditional news media in favor of social media. I got together with my niece and her boyfriend over the holidays, and they told me point blank that they get pretty much all of their news from Twitter. And when I questioned them, they said, well, all of those news professionals on TV, they have Twitter too. So, I guess maybe some of it, if they're discerning, is not bad. But I do worry a bit that it is a bit skewed in one way. So anyway, how do you define fake news? Think about it. It became the term of the year in 2017 after usage of the term increased 365%. I think we know why in 2017 it became so prevalent. So you probably have a definition. I'm going to share with you some that we collected. It's largely widely used, but misused or sometimes irresponsibly used. It's vague and sometimes oversimplified. A lot of people use the term as a catch-all, under which falls a broad variety of different kinds of false and misinformation and disinformation. So certainly, sometimes it's created by accident or design. It's sometimes just interpreted as true by some people and was never intended to be taken seriously. But it often refers to information with significance elevated beyond its actual importance. And then some people call information fake news because it casts them or their beliefs in a negative light, regardless of whether or not it is factual. So the findings of a 10-year study on Twitter use published in Science magazine in 2018 found by every common metric, falsehood consistently dominates the truth on Twitter. And the study finds fake news and false rumors reach more people, penetrate deeper into the social network, and spread much faster than accurate stories. We're going to delve into a little bit of the psychology behind that. So again, the types of disinformation. Here are some broad categories. There's satire or parody, misleading content, imposter content, fabricated content. We're going to go through some of these and show some examples. The British government actually distinguishes between disinformation, which is the deliberate creation and or sharing of false information with the intent to mislead, as opposed to misinformation, which is the act of sharing information without realizing it's wrong. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the midst of this pandemic that we are suffering through. People saw some false science, they believed it, and they unintentionally shared it. So here's an example of the satire or parody. Really, there's no intent to harm by putting something like this out. Some of the website examples are The Onion, which was first published in print form in 1995 and then later as a website, and The Babylon Bee, which is a satirical website launched in 2016. So The Onion's article on Kim Jong-un was reported as true by China's state paper, the People's Daily, and by South Korea's Korea Times. Certainly there's some soft news out there too, market-centered journalism that blurs the line between information and entertainment. And audiences may accept distortions to create humor as legitimate analyses. You know, you have some late night TV hosts that kind of go there, Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver. So some of this is for entertainment. And then there's misleading content, like this widely used chart to disprove global warming. It's an example of twisted statistics. They are used to make something easier to understand, but when used in misleading fashion, they can trick the reader into believing something other than what the data is showing. So for instance, this is data taken out of context. You'll see this is only covering a short time frame. And it happened that they chose, deliberately I'm sure, 1998 to start the chart because it was one of the hottest years on record due to an abnormally strong El Nino wind current. And of course, there's large variability within the climate system. So temperatures are typically measured with at least a 30-year cycle. This chart is only showing 14 years as compared to the one on the right now, where you can see this is like over a century, and you can see it's a whole different story. So numbers don't always tell the true story. Then there's imposter content. This got the ABC News on there, but if you look up to the URL, you're going to see it is abcnews.com.co, which is an imposter website. So if you're ever in doubt, click on the contact and about links to see where they lead. A major news organization probably isn't headquartered in a house. And so you can actually track this stuff down and find out where it's coming from. Then there's false content. This was a commonly circulated picture that stirs negative reactions to the US immigration policy. But this really didn't happen. It's not, this child was not in a cage. Instead, he was at a protest rally with his parents and was briefly separated from his mother when this picture was taken. So again, it's misleading content, false content. False connections. Here, this one shows the Super Bowl Patriot winning football team appearing at the White House. There was some controversy about people staying away because of their politics and not agreeing with the president. So the top picture was taken when Obama was president, and the bottom picture was taken with President Trump. Now, what's misleading about this is that the support staff is in the audience in the bottom picture. So it's the same number of people. They just posed the people differently in these two different years. So there was no real disparity in the number of team members who showed up for the ceremony. Then there's manipulation. This claimed to be a massive rally in California, but what it was a May Day march in Havana. So again, the imagery was manipulated to deceive. Fabricated content. This is an article supposedly coming from the Denver Guardian. However, the problem with this is there is no Denver Guardian and the events in the story never took place. So you have to really drill down sometimes to find out if it's true or not. And then this is a photo that was circulated on social media in December of 2018. It is a real photo, but it depicts a look-alike figure and not the real Donald Trump. Other fabricated content is created by digitally altering an image. This practice is so prevalent, the term photography has been coined. For instance, in this picture, this purportedly shows an NFL player burning an American flag, and it went viral in 2017. However, the original picture is shown on the bottom. A player was just celebrating in the locker room after a win, but using digital editing technology tools like Photoshop, it makes it easy to alter an image. And so they just put that flag in and a whole different story was born. So why do falsehoods dominate? Well, this is what happens on an internet minute. It basically visualizes aggregate online activity of billions of people in 2019. There are 188 million emails being sent per minute, 3.8 million Google searches per minute. And the point is that massive amounts of information simply overwhelms the brain. It causes people to resort to simple heuristics or psychological shortcuts instead of taking the time to analyze. Now, I think if we looked at an image like this for 2018, we'd find a lot of video conferencing in this circle somewhere. That's what we're doing today. So we have something called it is an algorithm used by the most powerful tech companies. I'm sure you've noticed that if you Google something, you're all of a sudden going to get little pop-up ads about whatever it is you were looking for. And that is because Google, Facebook, they personalize and tailor your news feeds and advertising to each user's profile. So you're only going to start seeing content that support your biases. Alternative stories are filtered out. And this just reinforces an existing bias. So for instance, the Southern Poverty Law Center investigated the Google searches of convicted murderer Dylan Roof prior to the Charleston church shooting in 2015 that killed the 9 African Americans. The results of those searches reinforced Roof's original biases. Hate sites were prioritized, and other perspectives ignored. Well, why do tech companies do this? It keeps their users coming back for more, and that drives revenue. So of course, it always comes down to money. So human decision-making, cognitive bias, this is huge. This is huge. It's an error in someone's line of reasoning caused by your personal beliefs. So there's confirmation bias. People continue believing what they already believe. They seek out information that confirms what they already know, and they ignore information that conflicts with it. So it's like the don't confuse me with the facts, my mind's made up type people, and you probably all know some of those in your life. And then there's narrative fallacy. People like stories because they're easy to understand and relate to. So you're prone to accept lies because they make better stories than truthful accounts. MIT did a study that found that false stories travel farther, faster, and more broadly on social media, apparently because lies do a better job of stimulating feelings of surprise and disgust. And I think conspiracy stories, theories are coming out here because, again, you know, that virology lab in Wuhan, there was a huge conspiracy theory that was circulating about that. So you get those kinds of narratives that are out there. And then repeated exposure, the tendency of people to believe whatever we're exposed to repeatedly, whether it's true or not. And so that's why politicians especially use the same words repeatedly. The affect heuristic, there's a mental shortcut relying on their emotional response instead of rational decision-making, such as making a decision by gut feeling. So these are all things that enter into the psychology why people believe fake news. And then of course there's the economics. Consumers spend up to 9 hours per day online on social media. It's cost-effective way to reach an audience on a global scale. Fake news can be a profitable business, generating large sums of advertising revenue for publishers who create stories that go viral. The more clicks, the more money they make. And tech companies use sophisticated computer algorithms to design and tailor their services, again, to their profile. So the content we see is tailored to our previous online searches. Remember, we talked about the filter bubble. Well, if you click on like on any of those stories that you see, like I used to do that on Facebook, and then I would get nothing but more of that stuff. So now I am extremely careful never to like any story with any kind of a political bent, because I know that I'm going to then be flooded with more of the same. And it pays to appeal to people's emotions and biases, because this makes them share within their networks. So the role of the news media. The Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2018 was journalists who were called the Guardians of the War on Truth. The issue celebrated journalists who put their lives at risk. They stressed that journalists are not enemies of the people, but reporting can distort facts. So sometimes you do have to be aware that there can be a bias toward the sensational. Controversy sells print and attracts viewers. And then there's that fear that journalists have of being scooped, because reporters sometimes don't take the time to vet their sources thoroughly enough. And so sometimes inadvertently, I do think it's not intentionally for the most part, they are pressured to get something out. And I blame the 24/7 news cycle. They report on site at the site of a shooting, and they start making conjecture that may or may not be founded in truth. And then of course, there's sometimes just not enough space to present the whole truth. So the shorter the story, sometimes they have to use their judgment to decide what to put in. And so sometimes you only get part of the truth. And then lastly, what can you do? Now, again, the information in this section is going to be summarized in the handout that will be attached to the voter today. You do not need to take all these notes down. So what you can do is learn to recognize those fake news sites. We're going to teach you some tactics in a minute. Be curious, investigate the source, use these fact-checking websites that we're going to provide, and then choose accountable news sources. Do the sources that you're following use journalistic ethics and standards? How much bias is there? And then you need to recognize your own biases. Check for an emotional response. If you feel emotional about something, you need to be doubly cautious of believing the stories that you think support your beliefs. And then certainly the biggest thing is use care before sharing. Don't share before you do all of the above. So recognizing the fake news sites. If there's no explicit or prominent editorial policy or statement of ethical standards, it's a big red flag. A reputable news source will always have a link to their policies on one of their navigation bars. It's generally on the left or at the bottom of each web page. If that's not there, it's a big red flag. Read the About Us page. So if you don't know who this is coming from, try to find out if there's evidence of any kind of bias in their mission. Google the news source. How do others evaluate it? Always verify a URL so you can spot something like the one on the screen here. And then verify addresses of contact information. You can actually check it out and make sure it's a physical address that, you know, like a TV station, instead of an apartment complex, because something reliable is probably not coming out of an apartment complex. And then be curious. Here are some fact-checking sites recommended repeatedly in multiple sources. And again, they'll be in your handout. So there are lots of these available, but make sure you check their legitimacy first. So these are good ones that are on the screen. If they're nonpartisan, they will debunk stories from both the left and the right, because there are plenty of misleading news reported by both sides of the political spectrum. Also, photos. As we said, photos are not always proof positive anymore. You need to really see if they have been altered. Here are a couple of sites that you can use. Twitter, well, here are a couple of examples, I should say. tineye.com is used to check the origin of a photo. You can upload the photo and sort, and then it will see how the image really looked the first time it appeared. And then be curious about the altered photos. You can search, again, another site is Google. You can search it on Google, upload by providing the URL. The top image, it returns an image and the number of hits. And then the bottom image is what's displayed when the possible related search is clicked. Notice that it shows the original and even labels the one of the flag burning photos as fake. So you'll see the one on the far right bottom has got the label fake on it. So they've told you that this is not to be believed. Then seek multiple perspectives. One of the reasons people are polarized is individuals tend to have a preferred news source. So they only see one perspective. To be curious, read reports on the same issue from multiple perspectives. So, for instance, notice the headlines. You can go online and read from 3 news sources. One is centrist, one left-leaning, and then one with a right-leaning bias. Or use a consolidating website that does this for you, like All Sides is the one that is shown. You'll see from the center, the headline reads, Trump to again propose slashing foreign aid and budget. From the left, Trump's budget previews his 2020 economic pitch, tax cuts and more, wall money. And then from the right, shrink government. Trump's budget reduces spending by 4.4 trillion. So again, you can see how this can be the same story can be written from different angles. So how unbiased is your favorite news source? Evaluating news sources can be contentious. People have their favorite and they don't want to be told it's untrustworthy. I've given this presentation a few times and people kind of start to bristle when they see that Fox News is not held in high regard as far as being unbiased. So you have to be careful when you point this out, but it's helpful to draw a distinction between news gathering. That's where you are doing the investigative work, calling sources, researching public documents, checking the published facts, versus news analysis, which can involve stringing facts together into a narrative. The same facts can lead to different conclusions, such as Senator Sanders is an effective legislator behind the scenes versus Senator Sanders is an ineffective legislative behind the scenes. It just depends. The conclusion depends on your political bias of the news organization. So bias can impact what's covered, what do they choose to run, which sources are interviewed, are people with different perspectives interviewed, and how the facts are arranged into a narrative, and then the conclusions that are stated. So when you are selecting a news source, check for one that is known for high quality investigative reporting. Look for lengthier articles that capture the complexity of a topic and events. 1 or 2 paragraphs is frequently not sufficient. So you need, especially on a complex topic, more information so you can draw conclusions. So this is a media bias chart. I know you're not going to be able to see this very well. It's an interactive chart. You will be able to get this on the website. And I do think this is really very much worth going to see on the website. It's at www.adfontesmedia.com. And it will show you how to navigate it. It has 2 axes. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but the quality and reliability axis is on the left. So the best means it's original fact reporting. Only the Weather Channel and wire services, AP and Reuters, followed by complex analysis from NPR, ABC, Bloomberg, and Wall Street Journal. So those are neutral and they are of top quality. The worst you can see, which is inaccurate, fabricated information, including, you'll see the National Enquirer down there on the bottom, InfoWars, and the Palmer Report. So those are the worst as far as quality and reliability. Now, where you're going to see the wider range is on political bias, which is the top axis. The least biased, ABC News, NPR, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. The farthest left of the well-known sources is MSNBC, and the furthest right of the well-known sources, Fox News. Some sources, such as CNN and Fox News, have 2 ratings, one for their cable news and one for their online. Now, notice, in general, the more political biased, the least reliable, with the exception of National Enquirer and World Truth. They have the fabricated content. Now, the origin of this chart, Ad Fontes, this website, had been criticized because until recently, all the ratings were done by the founder, and her methodology was kind of hidden. However, in June of 2019, they started using multiple analysts. You could actually apply to be a rater. And so these different people rated multiple articles from a source, and this did change placement of the news sources. So on the site, you can use the interactive feature and actually drill down into any of the rated news sources and read the actual articles they use to determine the source's position on a graph. And you can evaluate for yourself whether or not you think it's valid. This was the first media bias chart that I'd run into, and I found it extremely interesting, as have my previous audiences. Then I ran into this one from All Sides, which is one of the websites that we chatted about earlier. This media bias chart is basically to help people free themselves of the filter bubble. The founders are John Gable. He's a professional Republican political operative who worked for the Republican National Committee, and Joan Blake, who was the co-founder of MoveOn.org, which of course you probably recognize as being pretty liberal leaning. So you've got two people from both sides of the political spectrum doing this. And so it rates only political bias, not the reliability. And it covers online content providers, not TV, print, or radio. And it allows users to provide their own opinion of the rating. So you can see who they think is center. Again, the AP, BBC, Bloomberg, NPR, Reuters. And then right, and then farther right, and then left and farther left. So this, I think, is a really nice one, and it's probably a little bit easier to read, but it only covers online sources. And you can also drill down on a news source to see how the rating was determined. Okay, this we just found, it came up from Ad Fonte's group. This was about debunking conspiracy theories. It really helps you evaluate an argument that's being made. So your logic should tell you that there's a problem. If it specifically tells you, it's telling you the truth. You know, if they have to preface any story with that, you should know it's probably not true. If it contains a short, conclusory opinion statement, it's organized as a list of questions, it puts the burden on you to answer the questions, or it asks you to prove a negative, which is often impossible, or it suggests an insidious plot by someone. So the conspiracy theories today are abounding. One widely circulated one in England purported that the COVID-19 disease is not caused by a virus, but by the 5G networks. And it led to a whole rash of attacks on cellular towers in England. Some government officials, fearing political blowback, have promoted false claims, which can lead to a distrust of official sources and their data. So it's kind of sad when we've got some people who are throwing those conspiracy theories out, and they have obviously some authority behind them. I will just say that I've seen recently in some of my own social media posts, some attacks on the vote by mail. And that's of course something the League is certainly really working on this year. There are claims I've seen that the Democrats are trying to steal the election with the vote by mail, with widespread voter fraud claims by mail. People are really drawn to conspiracy theories. It's something about a psychological need for control, but I hope you can be ready to debunk their obviously illogical arguments. But first of all, you need to recognize your own biases. If something makes you furious, you react with some of these things. Be very careful if it elicits an emotional response. Usually that means you need to stop, pause, reflect, and investigate. Eliciting an emotional reaction is the primary goal of fake news producers. Do not be part of the viral fake news spiral. Do not share these things. So in summary, you should be learning to recognize these fake news sites. Take all of these steps before sharing a news story. Don't contribute again to that viral fake news spiral. And here's a little quote. And I'm going to let you read as we get ready to take questions. So hopefully you've been putting questions in the chat box, and I'm going to quit sharing my screen.
Thanks very much, Gail. This was an outstanding presentation. Thank you to Shar as well. We do have a number of questions, and I am going to go through them. And I know that you and maybe Shar will be able to answer them. You know, I want to start us off. One of the things that I've noticed in friends who are not as educated as most of the league members are, that there's a lot of confusion between the pundits or the opinion columnists and the actual reporters. And I've had to say, remember, there's a difference. The reporters are objective, they're reporting the facts. The pundits and the columnists are giving their opinions. And in the better news sources like the New York Times or the Washington Post, their opinions are based on fact. Have you encountered that as well?
I agree totally. And people seem to not be able to discern the difference. And that's one of the dangers. Like I said, in the old days, all of those opinion pieces would have been on the editorial page. Now you've just got a bunch of talking heads and people don't seem to recognize when it's an opinion versus the factual information being shared. So it is a problem.
Okay. And I'd like to point out in that media bias chart that some of the sources, like CNN, they rate CNN and CNN online, and then they rate Fox News and Fox Entertainment. And they show up on two different parts of the bias chart. And somebody made the comment, I believe it was about the Wall Street Journal, that their editorial opinion pages lean right, but their news stories are more neutral. And that's one thing you can look for a reputable, reliable news source is, are they very clear in saying this is news as opposed to this, which is an opinion.
And there's also, and I speak I was a reporter for many years before in my previous life. There's also, of course, the local TV and radio stations. They're reporting mostly on local coverage. So for example, in Orlando, there is a Fox News affiliate. It is not the same as the Fox network. The affiliate is a justifiable news, program, reporting on local news, the weather, sports, etc. So just because it has that Fox title doesn't mean it's Fox News. Now we have a question from Jean. Can you discuss what can be done or what you are doing specifically in the villages to educate people? As my understanding is the public venues, they always have Fox News on, and the majority of residents exclusively watch Fox. A while back, the local paper had no mention of the COVID-19 virus, instead only showed happy photos of the villages on their front page. Are there any efforts to point out to people that are not being informed?
Oh, certainly. I think we all know that the developer in the villages owns the newspaper, and certainly people call it facetiously the happy news. Certainly there was mention of the COVID-19 and whatnot, but news coverage is certainly, I think most people understand it's not totally unbiased by any means. And many people have sought out other news sources to balance it. That's why we get two different newspapers in our home, because we need to have a balance of information coming in. We are taking this Speakers Bureau presentation out on the road. This is been approved now from the state Speakers Bureau, so it will be available to all local leagues. And the more we can do to educate people, the better. And yes, certainly there are a lot of people in the villages who are right-leaning, but there's also a group of us who are not, and are looking to find balance in our information sources. So, and look for those opportunities.
And we encourage our members through our newsletter to write letters to the editor. I sent one out. I don't know if it did anything. For a while I thought it did, and then they went back again. They were showing all these photos of people. This was like the end of March, beginning of April, and everybody's all grouped together. And they were showing home delivery. And the delivery person was within 3 feet handing the package to the homeowner. And I said, a picture tells 1,000 words. Please be conscious of what you're telling your readers. If you're saying social distancing is important, then all your photos should reflect it. And if a photo is from an earlier time, it should mention that. And they did mention that for a while, then they stopped. And you know, I think all of us have friends, and we try to get information out to them as well. But it's presentations, writing letters to the editors, whatever we can do in our small way. That's part of the reason I think Gail created this presentation to begin with.
Great. Another question, this one from Mary. As we approach the November elections and the upcoming onslaught of campaign advertising and the Wild West of disinformation and misinformation, what can we do to educate our communities on the pitfalls of believing the information presented in these ads? Can we offer your presentation to our local communities?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
That's what we created it for, to share. And I always would recommend that people go to their librarians. They are information professionals. So if they need help in vetting information sources, those people are there to help you.
Okay. We have a comment from Eric. In television, many reporters are not trained journalists anymore. Many of them are political aides with great connections that want to make the news rather than report it. Sources are suspect and not reliable. They don't know how to run down a story and present the facts. And I don't know, what do you all think? That is a good point, because a lot of news has become more entertainment oriented.
Indeed it has. And so we just need to make people more aware of what they're watching, and entertainment versus news. There's definitely some differences, and a lot of it crosses the line.
But that's been around for a while. What was the movie that was out in maybe the 1990s with Holly Hunter? It was Network or something like that, where the person that had the main position was not the reporter. He had the pretty face. So, I mean, that's not necessarily something that's new. I think what's new is, and what's so dangerous, is all the unvetted sources that are on social media, and people believe those and don't bother to check them out.
That's right.
They don't listen when you send them, real information, because if I get emails from friends that are really biased and I can't take them, I go out, I do some research, I send them facts. You could hear the crickets chirping. They don't say anything.
Wow. Well, that movie with Holly Hunter was broadcast news, and
Thank you.
It's really a good movie. It's probably available to stream while we're all sheltering in place, and it is very illuminating. Thank you for pointing that one out. So we have a question from Marcia. Libraries and schools are closed, so no one can do an in-person presentation. How can this be used in the COVID world, this presentation?
Just like we're doing it today, Zoom. Our Speakers Bureau is going online through Zoom. So we're still reaching people, even through library programs. I'm doing this presentation. Shortly, I'm doing another one on women's suffrage for the Leesburg Public Library. We're gonna do one for the Villages Public Library. So Zoom, and yeah, I just see Regina said this is being recorded. So you can go back and share the recording of this.
That's right. And how are you going about your outreach to organizations and community groups who are not a part of the League of Women Voters?
Well, we had quite a robust Speakers Bureau. The last election cycle, we gave over 100 presentations, I believe, largely on the amendments. People were very anxious to be educated about the all of those amendments. And so we have a list of organizations that we have spoken for in the past. And so we're just doing outreach to them and saying, we can take these presentations online to your members whenever you are ready to start meeting virtually.
That's great. And this recent question from Sandy really references what you're saying, Gail. Could this actual presentation be available virtually on an open basis statewide or within communities? It's important to have a knowledgeable presenter. If not, a new presentation, perhaps the recording of the presentation without Q&A. Well, our league presentations, of course, have our league brand. So we're pretty careful, you know, with sharing them with other groups. We generally prefer to have a league Speakers Bureau presenter, and there are a number of Speakers Bureau presenters who can do this. Right, Gail?
That's correct. And we'll do training. Char's done training for Speakers Bureaus, people in the past. So anybody who wants to, you know, take this on, we can be happy to provide some training.
That's great. Okay, you're getting tons of wonderful feedback. People are loving this. We have a question from Linda. What about creating a subset of memes that echo the presentation's strongest point, that are league branded, that would redeliver the messaging in response to questionable social media content?
It's a great idea. Beyond my level of expertise, I'm not a meme creator, but I bet a Regina or a Blake or somebody.
I have a feeling that Blake Summerlin and Regina Sheridan would be happy to help with that. More questions about how to access the handout with this recording.
In the voter that will be going out.
Okay, and this webinar, Blake, I believe will live on the league's website, is that correct?
It will be sent out in the voter, and all of our webinars are in a folder that you'll all have access to that is also sent out in the voter. So you'll be able to access them at any time, just coming back to the email.
And that handout will also be part of that, right, Blake?
Yes, absolutely.
I think I skipped over one of the questions. It was about Twitter, and how do you know if the Twitter, the person tweeting is a reputable source? Usually you can click on that person's profile, because I do follow a number of reporters on Twitter, for example, from the Washington Post and the New York Times and some of our Florida newspapers. So you can be pretty certain if they're from a reputable news organization like that, that they're okay. But I would imagine, Gail, you agree with this, that, you know, a lot of just the regular everyday people may not necessarily be the ones to take the word, you know, from on whether this is factual or not.
I agree. And you just explained exactly what you need to do. Figure out what their credentials are before you decide to believe it or not.
Are there any other questions for Gail or Shar? We have just a few more minutes, and I got to tell you, guys are just getting fabulous feedback. They're thanking you for a wonderful presentation. This is fantastic information. Here's Stacy. May I add, the Pointer Institute is also working on educating the public about this issue, and she has put a link to the information in the chat box if you want to look at this. And that reminds me, also the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU has just put out the 8 lies about the election that people need to know are lies. And of course, the Brennan Center is where our lawyers come from, who, for example, just represented us on the trial on Senate Bill 7066 regarding Amendment 4's implementation. So the league is going to share that link with you so you can read the Brennan Center's points about the lies circulating about election fraud and things like that. We have a question from Sue. Even when you prove something is false, many reject the truth. It is like hear no evil, see no evil, cult behavior. How can we get people to open their eyes?
It's challenging. All you can do is present facts to debunk, but it is that whole cognitive bias. We tend to believe what we want to believe, and it's something that's being presented to them over and over and over again. It's sometimes very challenging to shake their beliefs. But all you can do is present the facts.
I read an article, about 6 months, maybe a year ago. I'm not sure if I'd be able to put my hand on it. And they ended up, the research unit that was trying to answer that question came up with a step-by-step guide to try to sway people's opinion. And one of the things it started with that I thought was very interesting, you start by listening rather than selling your own point of view. It's still going to be a challenge. There's a book I read in college that I have out to start reading again. It's called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. It's a seminal work in sociology, and it's about people and how certain beliefs are core to their view of who they are as a person. If they are a true believer and you attack the belief, you're attacking them. And I think some of that is happening now. And you actually, his hypothesis, and this book was written probably 1958, was you cannot change a true believer's mind about whatever their belief is, but you can switch their belief to something else. So they might be a true believer about politics today, it might be about religion tomorrow, or it may be that space aliens are going to invade, but they have to have something to believe in a group. It's somebody asked if we could put that in. That's a whole different presentation, and it would need somebody with credentials beyond what mine are. I mean, you're talking psychology.
Now, one more question we have time for from Mary. Would it be appropriate to condense the fine points and include a page providing the tips and guidance to voters on how to analyze sources and/or campaign information in our vote411.org guide? And that's something I can answer. We are in the midst of creating a myth-busting campaign, and we will be rolling that out in the next few weeks. We are working with several people in another organization to do this, a couple of different organizations who will help us with calling it myth busting or misinformation busting, and it largely will be around elections. I know people are worried about vote by mail, which more and more people are going to be doing this year, especially because of COVID. So that is something that we are planning on doing. And with this excellent PowerPoint created by Gail and Shar, we have another a way to exert that firepower of myth busting. So we thank you very much for joining us today and for showing this PowerPoint to us, for creating this. It's amazing. You did a lot of research on this and it shows, and I want to thank you both very much for joining us today.
We're happy to be here.
Thank you. And otherwise, we have just a couple of more minutes, and we have 2 more minutes actually. So if you have a general question that I can answer, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I can tell you all that we have another great Lunch and Learn coming up a week from today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And that one is going to be on a question that many of you have been asking us. How do you hold a candidate forum during COVID-19 when people are socially distancing? So the webinar will be about that. And we will welcome Michelle Levy and Charlie Williams, who have done a number of candidate forums, to talk about that and give examples. And I think it's going to be very educational for all of us. So as far as, I just got a question about the trial that just ended on the implementing language to Amendment 4. There is not a decision yet. We are waiting for a decision anytime, and it's doubtful one will come down today, but we are hopeful it will come down next week. And as soon as we get the news, we will blast it out all over social media, put out a press release and let you know, and it's going to be big news all over Florida and nationally as well. So I assure you, we are very watchful for that news and are staying in touch with the Brennan attorneys who have handled that case for us. So thank you all for joining us today. This has been a really great, informative presentation. Thank you again to Gail and Shar, and have a good and safe weekend, everybody. See you here next week.